Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my LCS Week 7 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. We are getting closer and closer and closer to the end of the split here. Only 2 more weeks of LCS action to go over, obviously, this week, and then Super Week, which actually starts today here on Friday. So, I don't want to waste too much time. I want to try to get this video out at a relatively decent time since we've already got LCS action overlapping it right now. So let's go ahead. Before we jump into anything, obviously, I want you guys to let me know down in the comment section below what game you were most looking forward to this weekend. There were actually quite a few interesting ones to choose from. For me, I'm going to go with a little bit of a curveball. CLG FlyQuest at the beginning of day 2 was definitely something that I was looking forward to seeing. But let's go ahead and jump right into our day 1 action. And day 1 was kicked off with a matchup here between Golden Guardians and 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves able to pick up the win here, although it was relatively close. And I will point out, Golden Guardians did make a few lineup substitutions here. Blaze Olive and Ole are out here for Golden Guardians. Leader and Prismal are in. I presume Ole is, Prismal was replacing Ole because they wanted to bring Leader in over a Blaze Olive and they needed to free up that import slot. But Leader and Prismal come in here. Definitely showing a little bit here. Not a particularly bad game from them. Honestly, they were definitely not the issues in this game. It was most certainly some other players and the players that have kind of been disappointing for Golden Guardians most of the year so far. But let's talk about 100 Thieves first and foremost. This was just a generally good game. Even if they were a little bit too close for my liking, they did smash a fight later in the game that kind of broke the game wide open, but during the early portion of this game, they were really giving over a lot of gold in situations where it just didn't feel like they needed to do that. I will say, big credit to this bot lane who had a very good week just in general. We'll get to that later, but FBI and Huhi, I think, have really stepped it up over the last few weeks, have really kind of come together and been a lot more consistent than I think they were at the beginning of the split. It's a good thing to see, obviously. They've proven over the past few years that they are one of the best bot lanes in North America, and that it's really, really hard to take them out of that conversation. And I think that in today's game, they really proved that they're kind of getting back on that track, maybe top 2, top 3 bot lane in North America right now. Huhi was really, really good in my opinion. I think he was generally exceptional this game and was a huge reason and probably the reason they were able to win the game at least as hard as they did towards the back half here. So Huhi is going to get my player of the game here for 100 Thieves. I believe Broadcast gave it to Closer, which I totally understand because 11 kills on the Wukong. He was doing a lot of really good engages towards the back half here. He really controlled the map as well early on. It's just, I thought Huhi was a little bit more influential in why 100 Thieves was actually able to take this game. He was really, really good on that Nami pick. Really helped Lucian's damage scale a lot. That ultimate was doing a ton towards the back half here. And then even keeping someone like the Ornn or the Wukong alive towards the back half of these games. The bubbles, everything was just really good from Huhi. But FBI and Closer were also very good. I want to give props to Someday as well for solo killing Licorice on the Ornn. That's a tough matchup to get a solo kill in, typically. I always talk about how Sejuani can play relatively safe because of the Ignite. Like, it's really, really difficult to want to trade with her, but Licorice did such a poor job in the laning phase and in the trade that Someday was able to get a solo kill there. So, props to him. And then Abadage was there. He wasn't a problem, but he didn't necessarily do a ton in this game. Moving on to Golden Guardians. This team sucks. Like, there's really no other way to put it. They're on, like, a 45-game loss streak at this point, it feels like, and, they're switching out some of their roster members. Obviously, River came in last week. You have Leader and Prismal coming in this week. They're basically throwing shit at the wall and begging for something to stick, and unfortunately, nothing is sticking right now. Even if Leader did have a relatively okay game here on the Akali, and I thought River played pretty decent on the Jarvan, wasn't making a ton of major mistakes at the very least. Licorice and Stixxay were pretty awful in this game. Licorice, like I said earlier, did get solo killed by Someday as Sejuani with Ignite, which is pretty much unacceptable. Like, that should absolutely never happen. There is no universe in which an Ornn should be able to solo kill a Sejuani in lane in pro. And so that's about as bad as that gets. Licorice continues to be one of the worst performing members of the LCS, like in all of the LCS over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is incredibly disappointing. And then my dud of the game is going to go to Stixxay because, quite frankly, I've never seen an Aphelios positioned so poorly towards the back half of a game. Stixxay was a big reason why 100 Thieves was able to win those team fights so consistently, is because positioning-wise, you have a Jarvan, you have a Sejuani, you even have a Lulu, all of these things that can help keep this Aphelios alive and help him do a lot of damage towards the back half of this team fight, but he's positioning in front of all of them, and he just gets caught and dies basically immediately. Not once, but twice, losing his team in the game. So, very much not a good game from 6A, not a good game from Licorice. Golden Guardians continue to show a lot of flaws. I do think Leader showed some interesting things here. Prismo, I think, is fine. He's been okay in Academy. Obviously, I think there's some irony in the fact that Prismo toils in Academy as, like, maybe the best Academy AD carry for years and years and years, and then he finally role swaps to support, and in that first split that he role swaps, he gets LCS time, which I think is just generally kind of funny, but you know, he shows up here. I think he does have potential to be an LCS support. I'm not sure he's there yet. I definitely think he needs a little bit more time to practice the role. But he was okay. He had to play with an ADC who didn't know how to position today. So I want to reserve judgment on that just a little bit. Outlook-wise for these two teams, I would say Golden Guardians is really starting to fall out of the playoff picture in my head. Like, top 8 feels a little generous for Golden Guardians with how they've been playing recently. They are not good. Like, they've genuinely lost, I think, like 4 or 5 games in a row at this point. And it's not just against good teams. Obviously, losing to 100 Thieves isn't the worst thing in the world, but they've lost to pretty much everybody they've played against. And it's not looked good. Like, they've not looked good in their losses even then. So, definitely something to be concerned about. And I'm really starting to hit the panic mode on Golden Guardians that they might not even be a top 8 team. As for 100 Thieves, this is a good win. They continue their win streak here. I think I'm a little bit lower on 100 Thieves generally because it just doesn't feel like any of their wins have been, like, super dominant. Like, other than the EG win, which really felt good, all of their wins, even against bad teams, have been like, well, you know, you made some mistakes, but you ended up pulling it out, which is just not the most confidence-inspiring way to go 11-3. But obviously, going 11-3 is still really, really good for this 100 Thieves team. They're still going to be in contention for the best team in North America. And they've certainly been one of the most fun teams to watch over the past few weeks. Moving on to our second game here of day 1. We had a fun one here between Evil Geniuses and TSM. EG picks up the expected win here, and they look pretty much as good as they can in this instance. Obviously, a little bit of a misplay towards the back half here, but Danny for sure makes up for it with a pretty incredible play in the Baron Pit. Let's talk about what EG did right this game. I want to give a big shout out to Inspired. Obviously, I've been a little bit lower, like not a ton lower, but a little bit lower on Inspired's split I think that he's been having so far. I think a lot of people are willing to just say, like, no question, Inspired is the MVP. It's not close. He's the only one in the conversation. I don't think that that is the case. I think there are quite a few people that you could at least bring up in the conversation with Inspired, but he continues to kind of keep performing week by week when other members of that conversation are maybe taking a little bit of a step back. So he's certainly separating himself, and I'm definitely not saying he's not the favorite, but he's been anointed, I think, the prize maybe just a little bit too early in my opinion, but this was a really good game from him, at least a really good early game from him on Poppy. He very much deserved the player of the game that he got in this. He was very, very active, much more active than someone like Spica was for most of this game. And that definitely played into EG's advantage. They were able to get quite a few leads in the top lane, in the mid lane, in the bot lane. They were just able to get a lot of gold on the map before TSM was really able to counteract. Now, obviously, Inspired did make a little bit of a misplay, extending a little bit too far towards the back half of this game. He gets picked. TSM decides this is the time to go for Baron, and they sit in the pit. They have 5-man do Baron. Obviously, no smite because Spica used it to catch Inspired. So it's basically a 5v3, almost a 5v2 here for TSM in the Baron pit. But a 5v2 with Zeri W when you're all clumped up is basically a 1v1. So Danny, Zeri W's, he goes in and he's able to clean up TSM. He's able to get the Baron. It's pretty unbelievable what EG and Danny specifically were able to do in that moment. I very narrowly gave Danny player of the game specifically for that, but I think Inspired maybe played the overall more important game. Danny just had the big flash play towards the back half here. Obviously, it's very, very exciting to see that. I'm getting a little bored of seeing, oh my god, Zeri, unbelievable W outplay. Like, because it seems to happen at least once every single week in every single region, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's still kind of cool. Vulcan played a good game. Jojo was using... Jojo was arguably using TSM's ult better than they were. The Azir shuffle was really, really nice. That one particularly stood out to me. And then Impact had one of his better games of the split, completely destroying Solo in that side lane on the Fiora pick. So overall, just a really good game from EG. As for TSM, not a good look. I mean, they're playing arguably the most dominant team in North America, at least so far this year. And so looking awful isn't exactly the worst crime in the world. And honestly, a lot of people are going to yell at them for making that play in Baron Pit after they got that pick. But I'm super pro at least trying to do that. You were down so much gold at that point that, like, who cares if that's like a 65, 70% play? It's not an 80 or whatever percent play. Like, at that point, you have to go for that. And I think it was the right call. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out for them. Unfortunately, they put themselves in a little bit too big of a hole early on. Spica just got out-jungled here by Inspired. I almost very nearly gave Spica the dud of the game because he was really bad towards the early part of this game. Obviously, Spica is always at his best when he's able to farm and then use his advantage to kind of further the lane's advantage. But that's just not the meta we're in right now. You need to make an impact early. You're not always going to have a ton of resources as a jungler. And I don't know if Spica has adapted to that nearly as well as some other junglers. He's certainly, in my opinion, been the best player on TSM, bar none, this year. I don't even think it's relatively that close. I do think he gets more hate than he probably deserves, but this game wasn't particularly great from him. My dud of the game is going to go to Solo in the top lane, who really just played awful on the Fiora. I really don't like Solo on things that aren't tanks, quite frankly, in Pro, because he has a very aggressive mentality, and he can sometimes get caught out of position. We see it really often with him. He needs a champion that's going to be forgiving for that. Fiora is quite simply not that champion. Your positioning and your map awareness on Fiora need to be excellent, and Solo just did not have that this game. He was kind of a sitting duck for a lot of the game, so definitely did not like that, so he's going to get my dud of the game here. Nobody else on this team was particularly great. Chime gets another game of Bard, and it is not nearly as good as the first, and like I said earlier, JoJo used the Azir ult even better than Maple did, so definitely things to consider there. Overall, outlook-wise for these two teams, TSM's fine. They're not great, they're not bad. They're kind of putting themselves in a position where, as long as they don't completely screw up the Super Week next week, they're probably going to make playoffs, which is, you know, pretty good for them, I would say. But sitting at 4-10 isn't exactly the most comforting place to be. It's just Dignitas, Immortals, and Golden Guardians aren't exactly the most fearsome of competitions to have to beat out. So TSM is in a relatively okay spot here. Obviously, getting destroyed by EG doesn't change that too much for them, but they are going to have to at least win a few games this week and next week. But at the end of the day, they probably control their own destiny, and they have a good shot of making lower bracket. As for EG, they very well could be the best team in North America. I think that crown is definitely up for debate right now. Them, 100 Thieves, another team that had a really good week this week, who we will get to. There are a lot of teams that I think could make an argument for something like that right now. EG is for sure one of them, and they very well may be at the top of that conversation. Moving on to our third game here of day one action, and we had certainly an interesting one, a little bit of a blowout, but a fun game, if not only for the implications. FlyQuest taking on Team Liquid, and TL picks up a huge win here. Obviously, FlyQuest, a team that's kind of right on that barrier, at least they've kind of been there for a little while. They had a really rough week in terms of matchups last week. It did not get any easier this week, and unfortunately, they were not able to step up to the challenge here as TL really dismantled them, and Bwipo, quite frankly, really dismantled them. I actually don't really love this draft at all from TL. It's a lot of the things that I warn you not to do in draft, which is index really heavily into early game with the Lucian Nami and then the Olaf in the top lane. Both of those picks really want to be ahead, and if they aren't ahead, they really struggle to scale. At least, maybe not Lucian, but like Lucian effectively just because of the range, right? But I think you supplement it rather well. Obviously, I love the Poppy pick. I think it's probably one of the best picks in the meta, pretty much no matter who you're going into. Poppy is just generally great right now. And then you supplement it a little bit with the Azir in the mid lane, but obviously I don't think that changes everything about the comp. But TL does do exactly what they wanted to do. They get a pretty huge lead early in the game on that Olaf in the top lane, who just gets so much gold and is able to become so much of a problem that with a Nami that has heals and an Azir and a Lucian for backline damage, like, he's just simply never going to actually be in danger. He can run at you and run at you and run at you, and you're going to have to deal with him. Like, you're going to have to deal with him at some point. So credit to Bwipo. Bwipo is going to get my player of the game here. He was really dominant on that Olaf. Not only did he get all the gold early, but he did a really good job of transitioning that into pressure throughout the rest of the game, and he was really a nuisance for FlyQuest to have to deal with for pretty much the entire game here. Wasn't the only one, though. I want to give big credits to this bot lane, who actually had really, really solid games as well for Team Liquid. Hansama and Core JJ. I've been really critical of this bot lane over the course of the year. I actually think this top side has been relatively good for Team Liquid, or at least underrated in terms of the grand scheme of things. I think Bwipo, Santorin, and Bjergsen have been the three members of TL that have been trying to get them to the level that they have been at, and Hans and Core have just kind of been, you know, walking along, like staggering along for most of this year, but they had a pretty good game here. Definitely outplayed Johnson and Afromu, which is a pretty good feat. Like, Johnson and Aphromoo aren't exactly a pushover bot lane. They've been pretty good so far this year. And Hans actually had one of his better games in quite a while. I think Core was really important, especially towards the back half of this game in the team fights to help keep Bwipo alive. And overall, I just think TL did a really good job. And then Santorin, I thought had a pretty good game here. Bjergsen did some good things. Obviously, he missed some shuffles. I'm not going to pretend like those didn't happen, but he did a lot of damage in the fight, so I think he made up for it just a tad bit. The only thing that TL has to be criticized for is they didn't listen to the guy who screamed at them to get the dragon. That poor guy probably walked out of the studio crying, and I hope he's doing well today. But moving over to FlyQuest, just wasn't their day. They're just not as good of a team, quite frankly. They got kind of outbalanced in the early game. Santorin did a really good job of making sure there was pressure on the map for Bwipo to get a huge lead here, and Philip, unfortunately, was the detriment of that. So Philip is going to get my dud of the game here. He just was not on the same level as Bwipo here today, which, quite frankly, you can't expect that. Philip has always, no offense, been the weak link, quote-unquote, of this FlyQuest team. And he kind of showed it here today. Bwipo was able to get a huge lead here on the Olaf and just kind of transition that into the rest of the game. But Johnson and Aphromoo weren't exactly great either. They kind of lost pretty hard to a bot lane that has been super inconsistent throughout this split so far in Hans and Core. So not the best game from either of them. Obviously, Jose Deodo and Takuya have kind of been the focal points, especially for the recent FlyQuest success. Like at the beginning of the year, you were seeing a lot of Twitch comps where you were playing around Johnson, but we've definitely kind of moved out of that for FlyQuest and definitely gone more to a Jose Deodo, Takuya kind of split carry system. And unfortunately, they just weren't going to get the resources in this game. Their team was too far behind. So there was really not a lot of opportunities for them to actively try and help their team win the game. Outlook-wise for these two teams, FlyQuest is starting to concern me a bit. Obviously, I'm not going to completely pull the trigger yet, but I'm not going to say I told you so on them. I never wanted to put them higher than 5th. It really never felt like they were going to be serious contenders to a lot of the top teams, and now that we've seen them back-to-back weeks, we've seen them face EG, we've seen them face 100 Thieves, we've seen them face TL, and really not look competitive against any of them. It really feels more justified to have them closer to that 5 or 6 spot than it does to have them even remotely in that top 4 conversation. So definitely something that I feel like I'm going to take a little bit of a win for FlyQuest kind of coming back down to earth a little bit. And then TL looked really good in this game. Obviously, they have games where they look good, and then, obviously they usually turn it around in the second half of the week and have another game where they look equally as bad. You just want to see the consistency out of this TL team. It's not the highs that you're worried about. It's the lows that you're worried about. So if they can have a game like this more often than they have, games that are just disastrous for absolutely no reason, then you're going to feel a lot better about this Team Liquid team, and you're going to feel a lot better about their chances going into playoffs. Moving on to our 4th game here of day 1, and we had a really, really good one to watch here, probably the game of the week so far, and that was, of course, Cloud9 taking on CLG. And CLG picking up a huge win here. And I'm very excited to talk about this because, man, it is exciting to watch the CLG team when they are clicking on all cylinders. If you would have told me in spring that this is the CLG team we would be getting towards the back half of the year, they're going to be sitting at 9-5. They're going to absolutely decimate Cloud9 in a really, really fun manner. And play probably the most entertaining League of Legends in North America. I would have called you crazy, but that's exactly where we're at. Big shout out to this team for sticking to its guns. The only replacement they wanted to make going into summer was bringing Dokla up, who had been incredibly underrated for so many years, kind of destroying both amateur and academy in back-to-back years here. He finally gets his chance back in the LCS after some time on Optic Gaming, and he really has proven to be a big upgrade for this team because of the aggressive playstyle that he plays with. He really synergizes well with Contracts. He synergizes well with Palafox. Luger and Poom have been incredibly underrated as a duo and really consistent in the bottom lane. CLG is just doing really, really well. If you would have told me before this game that Contracts was going to severely gap Blabber, I would have called you crazy, but that is exactly what happened. Contracts was dominant in this game, and it was really, really awesome to see. He's going to get my player of the game, very justifiably so. His Wukong was really good. He was just everywhere on the map, creating advantages in the mid lane, in the bot lane, in the top lane, wherever you needed him. Contracts was going to be there, and he was killing Blabber on repeat here. It was very, very fun to watch. Usually, I would consider Trundle actually a relatively okay matchup into Wukong, but man, it just did not work out. Contracts was on his A game today, and this is what happens with Contracts. Like, when he's at his best, like, look no further than this game. Like, he can really beat almost anybody in North America. He is really, really solid, and he's always been like that, whether it's been on C9, whether it's been on Golden Guardians, Evil Geniuses, CLG, wherever he's been, when he's at his best, he shows you why he deserves to have a spot in the LCS. Unfortunately, you just don't always get contracts at his best. He's probably the most volatile jungler that has ever played in North America, maybe in any major region. The difference between his best games and his worst games is honestly ginormous. So the best game here, though, he completely dominated, and he basically controlled the entire game. Like, every single lane, every single thing that happened in this game was controlled by contracts. It was fun to see. But credit where it's due, everybody else also pulled their role. I think Luger and Poom, like I've been saying all year long, have been incredibly underrated in the grand scheme of things. I don't think they're going to be getting a lot of all-pro votes, but I absolutely think that they should be, quite frankly, because those roles have been relatively difficult to find top-tier players in, at least throughout the year, and they have just been so consistently great. And CLG's success, I think you can attribute a lot of that to the consistency that Luger and Poom have offered in the bottom lane. And then Palafox and Dokla are there to just completely press on the go button. I love the Yone Seraphine, like, swap off here, the ADAP bot lane. Like, I think it is really interesting, and it's really difficult for someone like Lucian to deal with the Seraphine Karma. You're just going to get outranged so much, and obviously if he gets in, it's a problem, but he just never got the chance to actually do anything here. And quite frankly, Poom heavy gapped Sven in this game just in general, but overall CLG just looked like the better team, top to bottom. For C9, it's a little bit of a rough loss here. Obviously, this is a team that has really kind of been working recently, like, ever since Berserker and Sven came back in, I think they've only lost 2 games. I believe they've gone, like, 8-3 since Berserker and Sven came back in. Or maybe he was 8-2, something like that, like a ridiculously good record. And this is their biggest loss by far ever since they've had the gang back together. And this is a little bit of a rough one. I'm not going to pull the trigger just yet and be like, this team is in disaster mode. But obviously, losing to a team that is in the same kind of statistical, like, record position as you, this close to playoffs is never something that you want to see. But Cloud9 kind of got decimated in this game, and a lot of it was Blabber just getting completely out-jungled by contracts. There's really no other way to put it. Blabber's going to get my dud of the game here. He had a rough one on the Trundle. He was just not nearly on the same level as what contracts was able to offer on the other side, and he was punished over and over and over again for it, which is kind of crazy because Blabber is usually the one doing the punishing, so watching him just get completely out-jungled was pretty insane, and a testament to how well contracts actively played this game, because there really aren't a lot of junglers that have successfully been able to out-jungle Blabber even on his worst days, so definitely something to note there. And then, like I said earlier, Luger and Poom hard-gapped Berserker and Sven. I'm not going to say it's just the pick, because again, Lucian Nami can be good, and especially with like a Trundle, I think that typically can work pretty well, but Sven just did not play a good game of League of Legends here today. I've actually praised Sven quite a bit for his ability to play support throughout the split and his ability to pick up that role relatively quickly. It feels like he's pretty much a natural at it, but this was not it. He got completely hard-gapped by Poom. Just the pressure that he was able to put on in lane was basically zero. So definitely not what you want to see from a Lucian Nami lane. But overall, outlook-wise for these two teams, Cloud9, I'm not going to hit the panic button like I said. They're still a good team. It is a little bit concerning that they got completely steamrolled by a team that in CLG where they really should be trying to pick up a win here. Like, this kind of gives us a little bit of a better idea as to like the following of teams here, but overall, I'm not going to freak out and panic just yet. It is a little bit concerning, though, because this is a team that, quite frankly, hasn't shown the most level of consistency even when they're winning, right? Like, Jensen's definitely not had the best split of all time, and Sven has certainly had some games where it's been like, where are you? Like, so I am a little bit concerned about Cloud9, but definitely not enough to say they're, like, completely out of a world spot just yet. For CLG, great win. Like, this is exactly what you want to see. This is basically perfect, right? Like, you couldn't have asked for a better game here from CLG. Contracts looks completely dominant. Everybody on the team does their role, and they beat a team that is quite frankly good. Like, and we know they're good, and they decimated them. They showed that they are on that level, and they deserve to be in that conversation. So, probably the biggest win of CLG split so far, and I hope to see them continue this, moving throughout the rest of this year. That's going to bring us to our 5th and final game here of day 1 action, and it was a little bit of a battle of the least, kind of a rematch from an interesting game earlier in the split. Of course, I'm talking about Dignitas taking on Immortals, and Dignitas picking up another win over IMT here. Just when it feels like IMT is starting to get a little bit of momentum going their way, they lose to Dignitas. Well, I mean, shout out to Dig. I want to give a lot of credit to them because I actually thought their players played pretty well in here. And a lot of the players I've been criticizing pretty heavily have played well in this game, most notably the solo laners, who I have been pretty critical of. Obviously, Hoon in Academy, if you watched my Academy videos, I just was not a huge fan of what Hoon was able to do in Academy. It really felt like when he came in, he was not really an upgrade or a downgrade. He was just kind of there. He was kind of a middling top laner here for Dignitas, like him versus Tony Top, like really what's the difference? And then Blue, I have pretty perpetually called the worst mid laner in the LCS over the course of the year. He certainly played like it for a majority of the year, but in this game, I think both of them played generally great. Like, they are really, really, really solid. A lot of people are going to give player of the game to Blue because I think he made a lot of the flashy plays here on the Silas, but I'm going to give player of the game to Hoon in the top lane, who I actually thought made a really, really big impact on this game here. Not only was he completely destroying Revenge in lane, which he was, like, Ornn into Yone is not an easy matchup, and Hoon did a really good job of managing that lane and keeping it relatively even. But also, he was really important in those late game team fights. He had a really good catch on Lost towards the back half there, which obviously can be a lot easier on Draven for an Ornn than it is on a few other picks, because Draven's a little more telegraphed than I think a lot of other people are. But he had a really big pick on Lost towards the back half of this game that was a big reason why Immortals wasn't really in a position to be able to win some team fights later in the game. So I actually think Hoon had a really good game, and I think he deserves my player of the game here. But Blue also played really, really well on the Silas. I don't want to take that away from him. One of his better games of the split by a mile, by a country mile. Just a really, really solid game from Blue overall. Spawn was able to do quite a bit of damage here on the Aphelios, and XU, I thought, was fine here. Him and Biofrost were fine. They weren't really focal points of the team. They were just kind of there and good. As for Immortals, I'm a little frustrated with them because it really felt like this team was starting to finally find its grip and kind of push towards that top 8, where it really felt like they had the talent to be all along. But this is a pretty big stumbling block. Dignitas is not a good League of Legends team. They are pretty unanimously the worst team in North America, and for you to get pretty soundly beaten by them here is just not a good look, especially for Revenge in the top lane, who just got utterly destroyed, not only by Hoon, but Blue got a lot of kills on him, XU got some kills on him. He was a target in the top lane for sure on that Yone, and it did not come through. I really, really do not like this draft from Immortals just in general. The Yone top I think can work, but man, Lee Sin, Orianna, especially with the Draven and Mumu, like this is indexing way too heavily into the mid game, and you really have no way to win late game team fights. Like nobody on this team, unless you get a hyper fed Draven, is really going to be able to compete with Aphelios or Silas damage, right? You're just never going to be in that position. So don't love the draft here from Immortals, but overall, Revenge still has to play significantly better in order to make this comp work. Yone is a big part of this comp actually functioning in any sustainable way, and he just played awful this game. He's going to get my dud of the game. Not a good game from him overall. He's had quite a few of those stinkers recently. I know a lot of people, especially on Reddit, seem to hate Lost and seem to view Lost as like the reason that IMT is bad and the reason that they're losing. I certainly am not on that train. Maybe I just have a soft spot for him. I really don't think that's it though, because watching him, like, yes, he makes mistakes, but like no more than most other AD carries in the region do. Like, it's not like the AD carries in this region are necessarily perfect, but he is really the only one even attempting to make any sort of positive plays for this team. Like, Power of Evil sits back and does nothing for 45 minutes. And I like Power of Evil, but he's clearly mentally checked out. Revenge was super awful in this game. Kenvi did nothing on the Lee Sin. Obviously, he got to that point after 10 minutes on Lee Sin where that champion's useless. Lost was at least attempting to try and make plays and attempting to try and be aggressive here. It's just unfortunate that the rest of the team wasn't really in a position to help him out with that. So it's really hard for me to sit here and say that Lost is some awful AD carry and he's really dragging Immortals down. That is really not how I viewed Lost split at all here on Immortals. And that might be a little bit of a controversial statement, but really, I just don't view Lost as the hindrance on this IMT team. Overall, outlook-wise, like, IMT's gonna really suffer for this. They could have put themselves in a really good position to even be up near, like, the 7 spot after this, you know, game here, but unfortunately, losing to Dig is pretty much a disaster. They're going to be sitting at 3-11, the same record as Dignitas, and they're going to be fighting it out to even make those top 8 spots now. Obviously, the bottom 4 is incredibly interesting to watch because the difference between TSM, Golden Guardians, Immortals, and Dig is so small that it's going to be very, very fun to see which 2 of those end up being the 2 that get absolutely clobbered in the first round of losers bracket in the playoffs. So definitely something to be considered there. Obviously, I don't expect much from any of the teams to make it out of lower bracket, but obviously both of them want to make it. So Immortals definitely wanted to win this game, and they just did not come prepared. As for Dignitas, great win. Like, congratulations. Like, technically, they're actually in a pretty decent position to control their own destiny. They're only one game out of playoffs. Like, they're sitting at 3-11, and they're only one game out of playoffs. So it's really not like this team is completely out of it, even if they've been playing like they've been out of it for quite a while, and they're moving to, like, this big youth movement. If these guys start to click, if Hoon and Blue can play like this for a little bit, if Spawn continues to grow and be the AD carry that I think he can be, like, this Dig team very well could be a top 8 team. I just don't know if I'm going to predict that right now, because the consistency that we've seen out of Dignitas has been non-existent throughout the split so far, so I'm certainly going to need to see them step it up a little bit more against teams that just, quite frankly, aren't Immortals. Moving on to day 2 now. We get the second half of week 7 here, and we kick it off with what is undoubtedly the game of the week here in the LCS. I recommend you all go. I don't often say this for LCS. We don't get a lot of games like this, but I highly recommend anybody who hasn't seen this game go and watch it. Of course, I'm talking about CLG taking on FlyQuest. And holy cow, was this a fun one. This was, like, this is exactly what you want to see out of North American teams. Like, this, there is nothing more North American, like, gung-ho than this game right here. This was so fun to watch. It goes 51 minutes, 21-22, 40-plus kills, 50-plus minutes, a backdoor to end the game. Like, what could you possibly want that this game didn't give you? Just phenomenal. Just phenomenal overall. My only complaint about this game is that the way I set up my channel, I have to give a dud of the game. Because every single one of these 10 players played their role in this game, and they all played it well. So, I mean, I'm gonna give a dud of the game, as you can see it on the screen here, and I'll get to why in a bit, but really, generally, I mean this more than almost any series I've talked about all year long, there were no duds this game. Absolutely none. Every single person in this game played their role. I just think some were a little bit more important than others towards that role. Player of the game for me, huge win for CLG, has to go to Palafox. Not only was he doing infinite damage towards the back half of this game, and yes, he did make a few positioning mistakes. I'm not going to pretend like those didn't exist, but not only was he doing infinite damage towards the back half of this game, but man, the back door, baby. Woo! Like, it just feels, he's got to feel so good to accomplish something like that, especially to put your team at double-digit wins here and lock them for playoffs, which CLG did in this game here. Genuinely a phenomenal game from Palafox. He has been criminally underrated over the course of this split. He's someone who I don't think is, like, I've talked about Luger and Poom, and even Contracts, I think, deservedly probably getting some all-pro votes. Palafox absolutely should be in that conversation, and mid is an even more difficult position to break through with in the LCS, but man, Palafox has been genuinely great for a majority of the split. He certainly had his downs, but most of them have been ups, and the CLG team overall has just been so fun to watch that I really hope he gets the recognition he deserves towards the back half of this split. A really great game from him, but I gotta give credit to the Twitch here, the Twitch Lulu. Really strong lane here from Luger and Poom, and then Dokla in the top lane definitely did his job too. You'll notice the dud of the game, though, is gonna go to Contracts. Like I said earlier, Contracts played a good game. Like, him getting dud of the game feels completely disrespectful and not really indicative of how he played in this game, because I don't think it is. I don't think he played a game that deserved dud of the game, but at the end of the day, he was probably the one person on both teams that I felt was involved less than anyone else, right? Like, Contracts was around for plays, but a lot of the plays made by Palafox were like Palafox and Dokla plays, and a lot of the plays made in the bot lane were like 2v2 plays. And so it just didn't feel like Contracts was as connected to a lot of the plays as some of the other members were. Not to say he didn't, have an impact on the game, just it didn't feel like he had as much of an impact as maybe anybody else in the game did at that point. But overall, just a great game from CLG. Pretty much exactly what you want to see is a completely fun, amazing to watch shootout that is fun from start to finish. And then you got FlyQuest, who, man, did they play their part in this too. Obviously, we're going to sit here and we're going to talk about the fact that FlyQuest is on an 0-4 streak right now, which they are, but they did not play like a team who is on a losing streak right now. They played their absolute hearts out. What a game from Takuya in the mid lane on the Zoe. He tried his absolute hardest to completely take over. And honestly, he was probably the best player in the game. It's just unfortunate that he lands on the losing team here. He was so phenomenal. So was Jose Deodo. Johnson and Aframo even played really well. The explosiveness of that 2v2 in the bottom lane was so fun to watch. Overall, just everybody playing great. Philip didn't do a ton in the side lane, but at the end of the day, like, he did his job. Like you can be like, oh, he wasn't involved in a lot of team plays. Well, he's playing Fiora, and he was creating pressure in that side lane all game long. So really, like, there's no one in this game that I can sit here and be like, they didn't do their job. This was a masterclass from 10, really fun to watch players at a pro level, and it was just unbelievable, unfreaking believable from both of these teams, and an absolute blast. Outlook-wise, it's going to be really tough to talk about, because FlyQuest is on an 0-4 streak, and yes, I'm getting a little bit concerned. This was a ridiculously close game that they were very close to winning, and if they would have won this, I think it would have changed the entire conversation around them right now, but unfortunately, they weren't able to pull it out in the end. Takoya just wasn't quite enough. Maybe if he was on a champion like an Azir, he would have had a better shot, but unfortunately, he was just on the Zoe, so there was only so much that he could do towards the back half of this game, but a really good game from him, and I still think this team is an absolute threat, even if they're maybe not quite as scary as some people were thinking 2 weeks ago. I think they land pretty much exactly where I had them, in that 5 to 6 range, as a team that really could take a game off of pretty much anybody in the top 4. And I mean that, like, as sincerely as possible. If they were to upset CLG in the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Or if they were to upset a team like Team Liquid in the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised at all. They have the talent to do it. Right now, they're just not on the best streak and the best mentality of all time. So hopefully they can get their form back. But this was an awesome game to watch. And then for CLG, what a story, man. Like, talk about North American talent. Like, EG and CLG are without a doubt the two most fun teams to watch. CLG kind of being on a level of their own, but like the most fun teams to watch in North America. And both of them are the two organizations that heavily invested into North American talent, said, we are going to bring in young North American talent. We are going to give them their shot. And look at where they are now. Both of them have clinched a playoff spot, and both of them are looking to be in a really good position. If this doesn't tell you the direction that you should probably be going in as an organization in North America, I don't know what does. Invest in your young talent. Invest in the people who have proven that they can perform at an academy level, and give them the opportunity to show that they can do that at an LCS, at a top tier level, because they will reward you, or at least most of the time, you will get rewarded for that. CLG was awful in spring, and they stuck with it. They weren't determined to give up and say, well, we gave them their shot. They gave them another split, and now they are sitting here in the top 4. They've got to feel so excited. This is basically a dream come true for CLG fans. Moving on to Game 2 here of Day 2 action, and we had another matchup that I think a lot of people were looking forward to, as two of the more highly favored teams in the LCS faced off against each other. We saw Cloud9 taking on 100 Thieves, and 100 Team picking up a pretty big win here. They continue their win streak. They continue to look pretty good over the past few weeks. This is a team that has pretty much always done this, very similar to what I think of like a Mad Lions or something over in Europe, of a team that maybe doesn't always look on paper like they're dominating teams, but pretty much always ends the regular season with a pretty darn good record and puts themselves in a good position to control their own fate in playoffs. 100 Thieves just kind of feel like that, and they're kind of moving towards that. This was a pretty dominant game. I will give them credit for that. This is one of the better wins that they've shown in quite a while. Want to give big credit to their carry players who have really started to step up. I was really concerned about how a lot of them were playing over the course of the early part of the split, most notably Abadage. I definitely wasn't the only one who was concerned with Abadage kind of being a lot worse than he was last year, and he's kind of gotten back on track. The last few weeks have definitely been a lot better for him, and he was really, really good in this game on the Ahri. Very influential, was able to kind of control the lane with Jensen considerably, and then be able to roam to plays a lot quicker than what Jensen was able to do on the Sylas, but overall just a lot better in that mid lane position. And then, obviously, you got to talk about this bot lane that continues to be a huge positive for this 100 Thieves team. FBI and Huhi were really, really, really good this week, and really good in this game as well. Earlier in the week, I gave Huhi the player of the game. This one is going to go to FBI for me. He was really, really awesome on the Sivir. Obviously, we saw this matchup a little bit similarly in the LEC earlier this week, where we saw the Nyla get picked up by Excel. Going in, you've got 4 melees on the team. You've got the Gnar, you've got the Wukong, you've got the Sylas, the Nyla, and then you get Sivir picked into that, and Sivir just kind of obliterates melees with her W. It can be a real problem, and overall, I don't think Nyla is that strong of a pick anyways. FBI certainly capitalized on the Nyla Sona lane, and was able to basically obliterate it. It did a really good job getting super far ahead, and by the end game, like, this Sivir was perfectly, like, it perfectly counters what the C9 comp wants to do, and she had gold, and so it was pretty much game over from that point. FBI played it basically perfectly as well, so he definitely deserves my player of the game. But everybody on this team is really holding up their own end of the bargain, most notably this bottom lane, who continue to be definitely a huge positive for 100T. As for Cloud9, not a good week. Not a good week really at all. There's really no other way to put it. Probably Blabber's worst week of the year, including both spring and summer. You don't often see Blabber have two really bad games back-to-back, but that's kind of what we saw this week. I'm not going to blame it entirely on Blabber, even though he is going to be my dud of the game here for the second time this week. He definitely didn't have a ton of help here. Jensen was pretty much always behind on roams, and really they weren't on the same page this week. It really didn't feel like they've felt super cohesive together, although obviously it hasn't really felt like Jensen has kind of all been there this year so far. I definitely think Jensen is kind of, the macro part of Jensen has just kind of felt a little bit weird so far this year. And then Berserker and Sven just were not going to be able to touch the Sivir Yuumi lane. Like, Nyla Sona in no universe is really ever going to be able to compete with Sivir Yuumi, especially when Nyla's just not insta-giving you. And unfortunately, that's what happened here. Berserker and Sven really had no chance in this matchup. I'm not going to say it's entirely due to draft, but after basically 7 minutes, the game was over in the bottom lane. So something to keep note of there. Overall, I just don't think anybody on Cloud9 played this particularly well. It very much feels like this is a team where Blabber is going to go in and make these plays, and everybody is going to follow. And if he's on, they're going to win, and if he's off, they're going to lose. And unfortunately, Blabber had a bad week, and so Cloud9 went 0-2. And that really, really felt like what it was. Hopefully, they can get their shit together before playoffs start, but this is not a great look, because it's not like either loss was a game where it felt entirely unwinnable, like, matchup-wise. Like, earlier in the week against CLG, that's a winnable game. Even here against 100T, which you could argue is, like, significantly better than Cloud9, like, that should be a winnable game for this roster, and it just never felt winnable at any point in the game. So outlook-wise, I'm definitely starting to get concerned with Cloud9. Obviously, they were 8-2 with their full roster going into this week, so I'm not going to hit the panic button too much, but it is something to be concerned about, that it really feels like this is the one-dimensional team at the top of the LCS, where if they get their shit off and they do what they want to do, they're going to win, and if they don't, they're going to lose, and that's a recipe for disaster, typically, in playoff runs. So definitely getting a little bit worried about Cloud9. Blabber is going to have to definitely turn his form around for me to feel confident about this team. As for 100 Thieves, they're doing exactly what they need to do. They're ramping up. They're kind of getting a lot better at the right time. And yeah, a lot of their wins have been under the radar, but they've been wins. They're sitting at 12-3. They've locked one of the I believe they've locked top 4. I could be wrong about that, but I believe they've locked top 4 in the LCS here. And that's huge. Like, that's ginormous for them. And, you know, everybody on this team is kind of really starting to ramp up their game basically at the same time. I think FBI and Huhi are playing some of their best league of the split. Abadage is certainly playing his best league of the split. Closer and Someday are still playing well. Those were the two that were playing well early in the year. I think 100 Thieves is kind of sneakily under the radar as maybe the best team in North America, and it's going to be really fun to watch and see if they can continue to keep that rise going as the playoffs move along. Moving on to Game 3 here in Day 2, and we had another top-of-the-table clash. We had a lot of these in Day 2, but a lot of them were fun. And this one was going to be between Team Liquid and Evil Geniuses. Obviously, EG sitting at the top of the standings. They get absolutely destroyed by Team Liquid in this game. It was not even remotely close. TL completely obliterated them, and this is the TL that we want to see. Like, holy crap. This TL was so on point throughout this entire game. It was actually phenomenal to watch. This is probably the cleanest game that they've played in a considerable while, and probably the least clean game that we've seen EG play since spring. So, a lot of back and forth here, a lot of things to talk about. Let's talk about TL first. You can't talk about this game without talking about Bwipo. Bwipo, this is probably his best game in North America. Holy crap, was he just so dominant in that top lane matchup. He gapped Impact harder than I've seen almost anybody gap a top laner in quite a long time. And we'll get to Impact in a bit, but Bwipo's kind of under the radar, been very good for Team Liquid so far this split. And this is just kind of going along with that. There's quite a few situations in which I think Bwipo, Santorin, and Bjergsen, like, without them, I just don't know where TL would be right now. And they're really, really showing up towards the back half of the split. TL gets to 10 wins. It's basically exactly what you want to see. And guess what? With this win, they break the 1-1 curse. They had gone like 5 weeks in a row going 1-1 every single week. And they finally go 2-0 this week. And you got to be happy about that if you're a TL fan. But Bwipo looked unbelievable. He is easily my choice for player of the game. On the set pick that we're really just not seeing anywhere in the world right now, he's one of the only sets that I've seen all year long. And he played it like it's the most meta thing and most dominant thing in the meta in existence. So really just unbelievable to watch from Bwipo, and a great game from him. Gotta give credit to Santorin, though. Santorin, probably the other member of TL that has been the most consistent over the course of the split for them. Obviously, I'm high on Bjergsen, but I know a lot of other people aren't. Santorin looked really good in this one. Obviously, the meme we'll get to later in the game, but yeah, he looked great. He came top lane, helped Bwipo get ahead. He was helping Bjergsen quite a bit as well, and then late game, they were just able to transition that into pretty much a dominant team fight potential here with the set engage, and then the infinite damage coming out from Azir and Sivir on the backline, with Leona and Trundle there to just help everybody out. Like, really, really good team comp here from TL, and they executed on it perfectly. Just love the game overall from Team Liquid. Bwipo and Santorin absolutely destroying Evil Geniuses and punching them basically back into their caves. So, moving on to EG. Like, youch. Not a good game here, and I think a lot of it, I'm not going to say all of it, but a lot of it can be attributed to Impact in the top lane, who played his worst game in a very, very, very long time. And that, in my opinion, is actually kind of saying something, because I think Impact has been, like, sneakily really bad in summer. Like, I was really high on Impact. He was phenomenal last year in 2021, like, super under the radar great. Probably the best top laner in North America last year. And then he had a really good spring, a very important playoffs for this team, and he has, like, really retreated so far in summer. He's easily been the worst player on Evil Geniuses so far in summer, and that's definitely disappointing to say, and he got completely gapped here. Obviously, Freak with the call of the century here when he says, no matter which jungle comes top lane, Impact dies. And it was right. Like, he was absolutely right. Even if Inspired was trying to give him resources, it only hurt him in the long run. It was really, really disappointing to watch him get just basically completely destroyed by Bwipo in this game. So yeah, Impact's my dud of the game. I don't really think that's going to cause a lot of controversy here. Inspired did not play well. He probably should have seen that Impact was getting destroyed and tried to distribute the resources elsewhere, and I think eventually he got there where he was like, okay, we'll try to put stuff into JoJo on the Sylas, and maybe he can try to take over the game. We don't really have a hyper carry in the bot lane. Like, Xayah can do damage, but she's not really going to be able to match Sivir or Azir in terms of what she's able to put out. Like, we really need the Sylas to have gold, and unfortunately, it was just never going to be enough. JoJo did try to play his heart out here on the Sylas, but at that point, it was basically a lost game. So, overall, EG not looking great in this one, mostly due to the fact that their top lane just got gapped into oblivion. But outlook-wise for these two teams, this is a little bit of a frustrating loss for EG, because this is a team that I think a lot of people are really hoping solidify themselves as one of the top teams in North America, but you gotta win games like this if you want to solidify yourself as the top team in North America. Like, you're sitting at 12-2, obviously you've won a lot of games, but it's not like TL is some pushover team. Like, this is really a test of your might, and you did not pass. You very much failed the test here. They lost to 100 Thieves just a couple of weeks ago. It really feels like they are, you know, struggling to beat some of the better teams in the league, and that's going to be a little bit concerning come playoff time. Obviously, I don't really have a lot of worry that they're going to be able to beat, you know, some of the teams in, like, the first couple of rounds, but once you start getting to the semifinals and the finals, like, you have to win best of fives against these teams, and I just don't know if I feel confident enough that EG definitely has those series in the bag with how they have shown themselves in these games in the past few weeks. As for TL, they are getting hot at the right time, basically exactly what I said about 100T in the previous game, where this is a team that I think has been relatively inconsistent all year long, but this week was the best week of their season by a considerable margin. If they can play like this going into playoffs, like, they could very well be the best team in the LCS, which a lot of people just expected them to be anyways. Bwipo completely destroyed Impact. Santorin did a great job of, you know, keeping that pressure up, and then Bjergsen, quite frankly, just is a super stable presence in the mid lane, someone that I think is always going to be good for you and is never going to be a problem. And he's kind of been showing that all year long. Even if Hans and Core aren't perfect, they've definitely been better in recent weeks. And if this is the TL you're getting in playoffs, like, watch out the rest of the league. They very well could take the title. Jumping into our fourth game here of day 2, we had an interesting one. Definitely an interesting game with a lot of talking points that I'm excited to talk about, and that is Immortals taking on Golden Guardians. And IMT picking up the win here, an important win. Obviously, we get to see all the bottom 4 teams play each other in the last 2 games here, which kind of a fun way that this week ended up working out, where we saw the top 6 all play each other and the bottom 4 all play each other, kind of all fighting for their positioning in playoffs, but we definitely get to see an interesting one here as IMT is able to completely whoop up on Golden Guardians, who is in complete freefall mode at this point. They are just out of opportunities to you know, prove that it's just cognitive dissonance at this point and that they're better than they actually look. Like, this is getting disastrous for this team. They've been making panic roster changes and they're not working, and we'll get to them in a bit. But let's talk about IMT. Good bounce back after getting completely embarrassed by Dignitas earlier in the week. Definitely a good bounce back here. Power of Evil looked really, really good in this game. he's going to get my player of the game here. He gets to play as Azir, which is a pick that obviously he's very comfortable on. For as much shit as PoE has gotten this split, I really actually don't think he's been that bad. Like, he really hasn't been great, but in comparison to like a 3-11 or a 4-11 record at this point, like, he's not that bad, right? Like, he's not the worst mid in LCS or anything like that. Like, he's not top 6 or anything, but he's not bottom 1 or 2 in my opinion. He's been fine, not disastrous, just okay. And I think that's kind of where he's sitting right now. I have expectations that maybe on a better team he would look better, but he's just not the kind of player that I think can carry a bad team to a better spot. Even though he did play a really good game here of Azir, I think everybody on the team kind of held up their own end of the bargain, and he's always going to look better, I think, when the rest of his team holds up their end of the bargain. Gotta give some credit to the bot lane as well. Lost and Ignar played a good game here. The Aphelios Lulu combo has been pretty successful for them throughout the split, and overall, I've always talked about it. I really do like the Aphelios Lulu into Lucian Nami. I think that Aphelios can be a real problem for Lucian late game because it's really difficult for Lucian to actively get his damage off on Aphelios if Aphelios is prepared for the fight, especially if he has the right guns. It can be very, very difficult. And Stixxay, while he did have a little bit of gold in this game, and he was definitely the one they were trying to funnel through, it just was never going to be enough to be able to actively deal with what the Aphelios and even the Azir were going to be able to put out late game. This is a very late game oriented team, I should say, overall for Immortals, and they won early, so it never really was going to be in too much of jeopardy. But big shout out to Revenge, who actually pulls out the Graves here. Graves top is, I think, something that could be interesting. We're seeing a few different counter picks in the top lane. Obviously, in the last game, we saw Set into Gwen, which worked out masterfully for Bwipo. In this game, we see the Graves into the Fiora, which, again, always a pick that was relatively good for Graves. And even if he's not, like, the best in the meta, I still definitely think he's playable. And I would like to see a pick like this come out a little bit more often, maybe in a few other regions, if the top laners feel comfortable playing it, because into aggressive picks like Fiora, you can get the opportunity to scale up with the Graves, and you're going to do a ton of damage late game on Graves. That's really not something that I'm worried about. It's more so just the ability to get punished on that champion that I think has always been the issue. But really, you don't have that issue with the Fiora Trundle here, especially if you think you're the better player, which it clearly feels like they've thought in this game. So overall, like what Immortals was doing in draft, maybe a little bit of a risky draft here, because if you do lose hard early, which you kind of are setting yourself up in a position to do, it can be a little bit difficult, you know, but at the end of the day, scaling drafts aren't a bad thing, and I think you put yourself in a good position here, and the players executed. As for Golden Guardians, I'm definitely, like, hitting panic mode now. Like, I know for a lot of teams, I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'm hitting panic mode. I'm hitting panic mode. I am hitting complete panic mode for Golden Guardians. This is a team that really does not feel like a playoff team. In fact, honestly, if you ask me right now, they do feel like the worst team in LCS. I'm not sure if I'm gonna put them at number 10 in my power rankings, but they certainly feel like number 10 in my power rankings with how they've been playing recently. Obviously, you bring in Leader and Prismal, and Leader does not perform in this game. Obviously, he had a much better game earlier in the week, but you know, you have to win this game. Like, you have to look good here, and Leader just got quite heavily outplayed by Power of Evil, which is not what you wanted to see. Leader has always been someone that I've been a little bit on the lower end of the hype train for. It very much is like, oh, he plays Assassins, and that's it. And yeah, like, there are some other players in the world that I kind of like who have that playstyle. Cream, Certus come to mind as two mid leaders who kind of are in a similar boat, but quite frankly, both of those players are significantly better on Assassins than Leader is, and he comes in here and he just feels like a straight downgrade to a Blaze Olive, and so very much I would expect ABO to come back in for next week. Prismo was really only in so that they could play Leader because they had to take out one of their imports, and they weren't going to take out River, who they just acquired. But yeah, Leader is going to be my dud of the game. He did not play particularly well, although River was pretty close to that. He got completely out-jungled by Kenvi in terms of pressure. Not that Kenvi was everywhere, just that River really didn't do anything in this game on the Trundle, and that's been something I've been really critical of Golden Guardians of for pretty much all year long. When they had Pride Stalker, it was a huge issue that their jungle was just super not proactive. You bring in River to hopefully try and fix that, and it feels like he's fallen into a similar trap here, so I don't know. River wasn't very good on Dignitas either, so at least not in summer. He was a lot better in spring than he was in summer. He was honestly graded out as one of the worst players in summer, in my opinion, but you know, you brought him in here to try and hopefully upgrade your team, and you bring Leader and Prismal and all these roster changes, and clearly it's not working. You've stuck with Stixxay and Licorice, who have definitely felt like maybe two of the worst performing members of this Golden Guardians team. I just don't really see where a lot of the upside is for this. Outlook-wise, I'm very concerned. This team has very much put themselves in a position where they have to start winning next week, or else they're just simply not going to make top 8. And if this team misses top 8 with how they played in spring, they're going to be incredibly disappointed. So it's definitely something to keep your eye on. I'm not going to say they're completely out of it yet. Obviously, they're still in a relatively okay position sitting at 4-11. They're still, I believe, a game up on Dignitas. But at the end of the day, you gotta win, and they haven't won in quite a long time, so I'm getting concerned. A good win for Immortals, though, kind of puts them in control of their own destiny as well. It puts them at 4-11, and I feel much more confident about their ability to win a game or two next week than I do Golden Guardians. And so, if you really put these two in front of me and said pick which one I feel more confident about going to playoffs, it is for sure Immortals right now, and that is something that they're going to be very, very happy to hear, I think. That's going to bring us to our 5th and final game of Day 2 action, our 10th and final game here of Week 7 action in the LCS, and we ended the week on an interesting game, a little bit of a blowout, but a fun one nonetheless, between TSM and Dignitas, and TSM picks up a really important win for their season here. I believe with this win, at sitting at 5-10, they put themselves in sole possession of 7th place right now, which has got to feel like the best position in the world because you're a game up on pretty much everybody in that bottom 4, putting yourself in a position where you probably only need to win one game next week in order to actually clinch playoffs, which has got to feel pretty good for TSM, and a really, really good win here overall. I think the team just looked pretty solid. They don't often look this cohesive, but they certainly looked cohesive in this game. Spica is really awesome. Like, I think it's been underrated what Spica has been able to do with this TSM team so far this year. I think there is a lot of people that are down on Spica because obviously this team was really struggling this year. But to me, like, he still showed signs of being a top 4 to 5 jungler in the region. Unfortunately, he just didn't have the lanes to play around pretty much at any point this year. When he is able to actively play the game and actively look to take over the game, he looks phenomenal, just like he did in this one. He's easily the player of the game for TSM, and he has been the player of the game for TSM in almost all of their wins. He has looked really good. He's almost never been the problem for this team. I think somehow Spica's even getting slept on, and I think another player who's getting a little bit slept on here is Chime at support, who ever since coming into TSM has honestly been one of the more better performing supports in the LCS. I really like what Chime's been able to do. Those two players I actually think are totally buildable around in terms of if you want to actually make a competitive playoff team. I think both of them can start on a team like that and actively be high-level contributors. I'm not going to say that's the direction that TSM should go in, but both Spica and Chime not only played well in this game, but they've been playing well all split long, at least ever since they've been together, and I really, really hope to see, you know, some more growth between the two of them. I hope neither of them lose an LCS spot after this year. Spica probably won't. He's a former MVP, but I really hope Chime doesn't go right back down to Academy just because TSM wants to go in another direction. He has certainly proven in his time here on this team that he deserves to be in the LCS, and I definitely think he deserves to get another shot, but he looked really, really solid in this game. Solo has kind of battened down the hatches up in the top lane, right? Like, he's not been the problem. He was earlier this week, but we'll ignore that. For the most part, he's just been fine, right? Against good top laners, he's gonna look worse, and against bad top laners, like quite frankly Hoon is, he's gonna look way better, and that's exactly what happened here on the Ornn. He's a very good weak side player. You just don't want to put him on something like, oh, I don't know, the Fiora, and have him run it down, because it's definitely an issue sometimes with him. But overall, I just think this team is in a decent spot to kind of be the kings of the bad teams, and I think that's kind of where they are right now. They feel better than Dig, they feel better than Immortals, they feel better than Golden Guardians. And I think they're really settling into that spot. I really don't think that there is any chance that they contend with, like, the top 6 teams. It really feels like the top 6 are completely out of reach from the bottom 4 right now. But if I had to say, I think TSM looks pretty good, and they looked good in this game overall. As for Dignitas, like, you got to win earlier in the week. Going 1-1 is honestly not a bad week for Dig. Sitting at 3-12, you're going to be like, oh, is this a disaster position? But, like, honestly, 3 wins is probably more than this roster, quite frankly, deserves. They gave up on the split when they traded away River. Not even that River was good, but just the fact that, like, we're going full youth. Like, Neo is out, Spawn is in, XU is in, Hoon is coming into the top lane. Like, we are going full projects on this main roster, and we don't even really care if we make playoffs. But they've kind of put themselves in an interesting position here. They got completely obliterated in this game. I want to give a shout out to Spawn. Spawn is actively a very good player, and I think he's a very good player on a bad team. I would love to see what a bot lane of, like, Spawn and Chime could do together, because both of them feel like really good pieces of a bot lane that where their other half is just not very good in Instinct and Biofrost. No offense to Biofrost, he was just kind of a target in this game. But Spawn actually feels like a pretty good player and another player that I really hope continues to get opportunities in the LCS, not just because he's come in and, like, played for a really awful team in Dignitas and been the only shining light. Like, I just really hope that doesn't, like, tank his career prospects just because his team didn't win when he was put in, because I think it's obviously bigger than him, but really, the problem has been the top side of this map. XU has been out jungled by pretty much everybody he's played against. Obviously, Spica's a pretty high bar to set, but he's been out-jungled by everybody, and then Hoon is just not good. I know he kind of obliterated Revenge earlier in the week, but man, he got obliterated by Solo in this game. One of the worst Sejuani games I've seen in quite a long time. A pick that I generally feel is very safe. We've seen it now multiple times this week where the Sejuani goes into the Ornn and the Ornn just obliterates that matchup. That is not how that matchup is supposed to go. And so very, very concerning here from Hoon. He's going to get my dud of the game here for Dignitas. He's just not ready for the LCS. Even when he looked good, it very much felt like it was the other team looking bad, more so than him like playing out of his mind. I think Hoon is just not at that level. I think you could really make a case that he's just not a top 10 top laner in North America. Maybe not even a top 15 one. Like, even when he was in Academy, he really wasn't looking all that good. So I get that you want to give the young guys some opportunities here, but Hoon, I just do not think is ready for this opportunity. So outlook-wise, both of these teams are in similar spots. TSM, I think, is in a much better one, obviously, because they've kind of locked themselves in a position where, really, unless they completely shit the bed and other teams completely outperform expectations, they're probably going to make playoffs here, which is, you know, good for them. It would be an absolute disaster if they didn't, sitting in 7th place. But for Dignitas, like, they're also in a position where they have put themselves, like, they're really, I mean, they're by their own lonesome in number 10, but they're only one game out of number 8. And so really, if things go right next week, let's say they win a game and Immortals and Golden Guardians don't, which is a real possibility, like, they could put themselves in a playoff position here, which could be relatively interesting. And so it's definitely something to consider. They're not completely out of it yet, even though they sacked the split, but I don't think either of these teams is actually going to make any sort of waves, even if they do make playoffs. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 7 overview and analysis of all 10 games across both days of LCS action here. We had a really fun week, and up on the screen right now, you're going to see the fruits of that week, which is the updated LCS standings. Any ties in the standings will be broken alphabetically. So obviously, there are quite a few things that are definitely interesting here. Any coloration differences are going to be people that have either locked playoffs or been locked out of playoffs. Luckily, because of the way the bottom 4 has worked out, nobody's actually out of playoffs going into the final week, which is really, really fun. The dark green will signify they have locked top 6. You have confirmed to be in the top 6 if you have dark green, and then the light green will confirm playoffs, but not confirmed top 6. So just noting that. In the first column, you're going to see my updated power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week going into this week. And we can go over the biggest risers and the biggest fallers. We'll actually just go over the power rankings from 1 to 10 because there were a lot of risers and fallers this week. Jumping up to number 1 from number 2 is going to be 100 Thieves. It just feels like they are the most consistent team in the LCS right now. I think I have the most confidence in them of pretty much any team in the league. And jumping up to number 2 is actually going to be Team Liquid. A huge win over EG, where they quite frankly just looked like the better team. And that kind of compounds with EG being at number 3. I'm getting concerned about Evil Geniuses. They did not look super competitive against either 100 Thieves or Team Liquid, the two teams that they really needed to look most competitive against. And so just with that worry, they're going to drop to number 3 for me for now. Obviously, 1 to 3 I think is very, very close in terms of skill level. In a best of 5, I'm really not sure who I would take in any of these matchups. They're all very versatile, but that very much feels like a locked top 3 right now. The top 4 has been broken into, though, because finally, Cloud9 is dethroned and drops down to number 5, and CLG is going to jump up to number 4 in the power rankings. They look phenomenal, not only this week, but just in general. Obviously, the variance of this team is a little concerning. Contracts can just have these games where he's not good. Dokla does the same thing, but when they are on, I truly believe they are better than Cloud9. I think they're better than FlyQuest. I think they're kind of the top of that little next grouping of teams in terms of skill level, and I'm really, really excited to see what they might be able to do come playoff time, especially if they get matched up against a team like C9 in the first round of the playoffs, which could be very interesting. And then moving in at number 5, like I said, C9, a rough week here for them. Definitely not what you wanted to see in an 0-2 week. Obviously, it's not the end of the world. They looked very good before this week, but some of their problems are starting to show. If Blabber is not playing at a high level, I very much don't know if this team has the potential to beat anyone in the top 6. And that is very concerning when all of your game plan relies on one player. Definitely not something I'm a huge fan of in terms of rating teams highly, so they're going to fall to number 5. And then FlyQuest at number 6. Obviously, they put up a good fight against CLG, but a 4-game loss streak is a 4-game loss streak. They haven't won a game in 2 weeks. It's definitely getting a little concerning. The talent level on this team is good, but it's not excellent. It's certainly not to the level of any of the other teams in the top 5, at least maybe other than CLG, but CLG is a significantly better unit. I think Takuya is really the guy. Like, if he's on, this team has a chance to win pretty much any game, but they have a lot of problems outside of that. Philip is certainly not a top 6 or 7 top laner in the league. Johnson and Aframu can definitely be variant, and so can Jose Deodo, so not a lot of confidence coming out from them, so they fall at the bottom of my top 6, in my opinion. Moving on to 7, 8, 9, and 10, they should be pretty much exactly how I talked it out in the video. TSM coming in at number 7, they are easily the most consistent of the bottom 4 teams, and probably the one with the most upside. Immortals coming in at number 8, their win over Golden Guardians just gives me a little bit more confidence that they're the better team. Not that that's saying much, because Golden Guardians isn't exactly great. They fall all the way down to number 9. This is a team that has basically tanked their playoff odds after having a relatively decent start to the year. They've just not been able to win in 3 weeks. And they are switching everything around. They're hitting the panic button, and the panic button has been hit for me too. They are now out of the playoffs in my power rankings. And then Dig, just talent-wise, is the worst team in the league. I don't expect them to be able to take games regularly. Like, I would never predict them to really win a game, and so for me, they fall in at number 10, and they're going to stay at number 10. But that being said, we can move on to the player of the week and the dud of the week here for week 7. And we had some interesting options here, but my player of the week in Week 7 in the LCS is going to go to Bwipo on Team Liquid, who was just phenomenal this week. Not only was he great early in the week with a really, really important win over FlyQuest, where he kind of decimated Philip in that matchup, but he obliterated Impact in the second matchup of the week. An absolute stomp. One of the best weeks we've seen from a top laner in the LCS so far this year. Bwipo looked really, really great on Team Liquid, and he absolutely deserves the player of the week here for Week 7. Moving on to the dud of the week, and this one is a little bit hard to give out because I didn't want to do it, but it really was only one option for it this week. My dud of the week in Week 7 is going to go to Blabber on Cloud9, who was just not good this week. There's really no other way to put it. He was out-jungled by Contracts, and in that matchup, it honestly wasn't even really that close. Like, he got kind of obliterated, and he didn't look much better later in the week either. Like, this is definitely the time where I'm starting to get a little concerned with Cloud9, and a little concerned with Blabber. Hopefully he can get more consistent. This is someone who I've kind of attached my flagpole to, as I think he's the most talented jungler the LCS has ever seen. Obviously, I still stick by that argument, and I think he will turn it around, but Week 7 was certainly not a good week for him. So yeah, Blabber is going to be my dud of the week in Week 7, and Bwipo is going to be my player of the week in Week 7. But that's going to be it. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot for the channel, and obviously it means a lot for me as well to know that you guys like the content. Let me know down in the comment section below who your team of the week, your player of the week, your dud of the week, your game of the week, all that stuff was. You know I love chatting it up with you guys. Obviously, you guys are going to have different opinions on the power rankings than I am, and I would love to hear that down in the comments section below. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.